Today we're going to go over basically curtain panels, pattern-based patterns again. Last time we kind of introduced what we could do with the curtain panels, and I'm going to show you guys how we can actually make some guardrail systems instead of using the railing tools that already come with Revit. If you're working on a path that's actually just that conceptual mass that we've gone over in the last couple of classes, kind of that swooping or the sweep along the rail with the kind of that boxed outline that makes it solid. Once you're in the conceptual mass environment, we can actually create any kind of component as long as we understand a little bit more about the curtain panels. And then I also want to go over the adaptive components. We're good there? Mm-hmm. All right. So if we can load up your main Revit screen, and I'm also going to create a new family. And we want to be on a curtain panel pattern-based family type as our template. I'll let you guys catch up here for just a second. I'm going to load up an example real quick. So we're going to make this glass panel guardrail that you could actually apply to your parametric bridge. And last time we went over this particular curtain panel. So you can start to see that as long as we can understand that we can make a surface out of anything and then divide it up, we can apply any kind of component to it as long as you kind of imagine what we can make with this particular template. So again, we're just in the regular curtain panel pattern-based family type, and we're using the rectangular grid. I find those to be the most successful. So if you can make anything that you want in this particular family, I think you'll always have some pretty good success. First thing I'm going to do though is if we're thinking about this as a railing or something that's going to be vertical, when you look at this screen, when it first comes in, you look at the little view cube at the top, you see where it says front, then it has top. If you start to rotate around, that view cube also rotates and tells you about the left side, the right side, and also the back. When we're going to be applying this to a vertical surface, and we're actually kind of concerned with what's on top and what's on bottom, when you look at the top view, if it says top and you're looking at the front, then this line that's on the back side is the top, will be the top of the guardrail. So this basically down here at the front is going to be the base. And these would be the verticals on either side. And again, this is the top. So I'm going to turn off my line weights here just by using that thin lines command at the very top. And I'm going to actually put in 4 points along, I guess you'd call these eventually the posts. And I'm just going to make each of these points let's set up a couple parameters like we did last time. I'm going to create 2 parameters. One's called panel offset, and make sure the type of parameter is set to number. And the other one will be panel offset inverse. Type of parameter also needs to be a number. In the formula for panel offset inverse, I'm basically going to copy the panel offset, so Control C on that, and then type in 1 minus panel offset, so that whatever value we put in for the panel offset will get the inverse. That's always going to be less than 1. And I'll make this like a 0.1 for the panel offset. And then we can set each of these points If you look at the normalized curve parameter again down here at the bottom, if it's closest to 0, then that will be the panel offset. And if it's closer to 1, it needs to be the panel offset inverse. So this is kind of a recap a little bit about what we did last class. And I like to set, when I'm in this environment, pretty much everything to a parameter so that I don't have to go back and individually click on each of these points later on if I want to make any adjustments. I can just adjust it in the family types panel. The next thing I want to do is, before we continue, this rail system is always going to be 3 foot 6 inches high. And if you click on the grid, you'll notice that the grid can be set to a horizontal and vertical spacing while you model. This isn't really dictating that this panel is always going to be 10 foot by 10 foot, because remember, these points are adaptive, so they stretch to however the surface ends up getting divided up, and whatever those particular dimensions are. But for now, I'm going to make my vertical 3 foot 6 inches, and then maybe the horizontal something like 5 foot. Because that would be a more typical spacing of a guardrail system. 5 foot for the spacing between posts, and then 3 foot 6 high. Next thing I'm going to do is create a line that connects these dots that we just created, and it's going to be a reference line. I'm going to make sure 3D snapping is turned on, and then I'm going to make sure I'm snapping to each of these points, and I'm just making a horizontal line across the top and the bottom connecting those points. Then on those lines that we just created, I'm going to make 4 more points, and again, these are going to be equal to those same normalized curve parameters. So we can say if it's closer to 0, panel offset. This other one's probably panel offset, and these other two are the panel offset inverse. So with those points, you can start to see with the current panel, everything that you make wants to be hosted by these reference lines or even these points, because you can easily move those up and down using those normalized curve parameter values. I'm going to make another line reference, and I've got 3D snapping on, and I'm also going to make sure the chain is selected, and I'm just going to connect all 4 of those dots that were now offset towards the middle. And when you're done, you can hit escape. This will make it so that you should be able to at least select an inner panel, as I have shown on the screen here. So with that inner panel, if we select, if you just hover over it and select it, it should highlight all of them because it's a chain. I'm going to create a form, and it'll make it a solid form. And remember, you get these little icons that pop up that say to make it either flat or an extrusion. We're going to give it some thickness, so pick the extrusion one. And then the positive and negative offset of that extrusion over in the properties palette. This is going to be a glass panel, so I'm going to make this a, let's say, 1/2 inch thick piece of glass. So I need a 1/4 inch on either side, so positive offset and negative offset are equal to 1/4 inch. Now again, you could make those equal to a parameter that we could adjust later on, but I'm not going to probably adjust that anytime soon. And now, since this is supposed to be glass, before we continue, I want to set the material of this panel. So if you left click on that panel, under where we just did the positive and negative offset, you've got material that you can set. And if you click on by category and then click on the arrow or the button that shows up, we can select glass. And when we do that, I notice that nothing really changes with the appearance of this render. So that tells me that this glass that comes with this particular curtain panel doesn't have a material set to it. So under appearance, let's go ahead and click on glass and then pick one of these glass types that you have in here. I picked blue-green, and we'll hit OK. Now when I turn on the shaded mode down at the very bottom with your display graphics, we were in hidden line or wireframe. If you turn on shaded, you can see a transparent and kind of this glass color. Before we continue, I'm going to do a file save as family and save this. So the next part is to complete the rail. I basically need some posts, I need a top rail, and then I'm going to make a bottom C channel down here at the very bottom, something that we can extrude along the path of our bridge. And so in order to do that, we need our point element again, and we want to pick, I'm just going to do these at the midpoints of each of these exterior lines. And the reason I'm doing this is we need a plane to draw a 2D profile on. So I'm selecting all 4 of these points now, and I'm turning on show reference and checking that to always. And so I'm drawing these points so that I have a actual hosted point on this line, and I have a plane that's perpendicular to it that I can draw on, that we're able to extrude along that particular path. First thing I'm going to do is let's do the posts. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I want to do a placement plane. And if you do pick plane and pick one of these planes on either the right side or left side, and I'm going to choose rectangle again, and I'm going to turn off 3D snapping on this case, because while we're drawing on this plane, I just want to draw on a 2D surface, and I don't want it to think we need to go in 3 dimensions. So I just drew a rectangle, and then I'm going to draw some dimensions to either side and make those equal. And I'm going to change my scale down here at the bottom to something like 3/8, just so my numbers, all that's doing is changing the scale of the text. I'm going to do the same thing on the vertical side. I'm going to do a dimension string and then make it equal. And then we can do an overall dimension string on each case. I'm going to create a parameter, and it's going to be called post depth. And let's make another one called post width. I'll make the post width, let's just do 1 inch for now, and then post depth will be something like 3 inches. Now, so when I'm looking at this is a kind of like a curtain panel or a guardrail system that's laid down on the floor that we're building. And remember, this is the top over here. So when I'm eventually looking at this, the depth of the post is actually moving up and down. So I want this dimension to be equal to the post depth, and then the other one to be equal to the post width. And while you guys are catching up on that one, I'm going to do the same exact thing on this other point that's on the other side. So we can go ahead and click on rectangle. Make sure we pick our reference plane. Have to draw the rectangle again, make sure 3D snapping's off. Drawing the rectangle, and then all of these dimension strings one more time. Then our overalls. And then you can set the dimensions to have the same parameter settings. So again, post width and post depth. you start to see when we're adding a lot of parameters and dimensions to this environment, we get a lot of text. At any time you can change the scale so that we don't have big numbers everywhere. So down at the bottom you can change this to be like 3/4 inch equals a foot. That'll make all your text smaller. And eventually you could type in VG on your visibility graphics, and under annotation categories you can uncheck dimensions, and that would hide those values once you're done if you needed to. I think you can also individually, nope. Yeah, you can temporarily hide the dimensions as well. Okay, so now that we've done that, what we can do is we want to select just the post. So you notice that when we select or try to select one of those post legs, it wants to select that reference plane or the reference line that goes all the way around the boundary. So if you just hit the tab button, it'll individually select that one post. I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to control and select the other 2D profile that's associated with that line, and then select create solid form. I'll do the same thing on the other side. And I'm going to do the same thing to the top rail over here. So remember the top is over here on the back side when you look at your view cube. Except that my parameters will be a little bit different. So I'm going to add a top rail width. Or I guess that should be a top rail depth. And make another one called top rail. Just going to make that one height. My top rail depth is going to be, let's make it something a little bit larger than the post. So 5 inches. The top rail height will be, we can make that 1 inch. So now I'm just going to, on this particular point on the plane, again draw another rectangle. So you can see this is very similar to drawing the profiles for the rail and then using the rail command, but we're having to kind of force exactly where the height is located. I need to rectangle. And then I'm going to draw my dimensions equal on top and bottom. And so on this particular rectangle over here at the top, the one that's horizontal, or the one that's going, I guess from front to back, if we look at the view cube, that one will be the top rail height. Another one will be the top rail depth. Oops. And then all we need to do is tab over, select the top, and then select the other control and create the form.
Where do you change it to top rail height?
I created two more parameter types.
I did that.
And I did top rail depth and top rail height. And then when you have your dimension string, when you select the dimension string, you have the label, and then you have the pull down menu to select.
That's my one.
You guys, top front, up there too. What's that?
Those are, he's keeping those equal. And then this is the total what you said.
What do you need to know?
I don't know whether that should
Okay. The are you on the top rail?
So we need to turn on the rail.
Yeah.
Have that point selected.
Yeah, so this one will be the depth,
And under straight.
and the other one will be the
And make that a separate top
This
rail.
is depth.
If you want to keep that plane.
You might have
and
called it a
draw
width,
it.
that's fine.
And you draw a rectangle.
Oh, you have another dimension.
But something like this, right? So that,
I might have the.
Okay, so you're on the same piece. Okay, this is gonna be the top rail,
And the reason why you
and so you set that post step,
Just
and
draw it.
and this
you can only set one
this needs to be
dimension, so this should actually be the top rail,
Then now you should go
It's like
with.
1 inch.
and this one, but those are gonna be, yeah, on these, going up and down.
I think probably what it was, just because you hadn't made that plane, it wasn't actually going on that.
And so when you do the posts that are on either side, the depth is this way and the width is that way. Okay, so the next part is I'm going to do a save as or just do a save if you've gotten this far, so at least you have something to, just in case your computer crashes or something like that. The next part is going to be, I'm going to do the easy part, which is going to be kind of the reference planes that are on the top and the bottom of this glass piece. I'm going to kind of make a frame that it needs to be held in. And in order to do that, instead of doing something very complicated, I'm just going to select the reference plane or the reference line, and then choose Create Form, Solid Form, and it extrudes up a single plane. And then I can select that plane and then give it a positive and negative offset, which I might do something like 0.5 inches on each of those. This way, it's a kind of a quick way to get kind of a solid piece that might render, when you're actually rendering. If I had a little bit more time, I'd probably, do the same thing where we make an extrusion, just like we did with the post and the rail. But you might want something kind of small. So I'm going to do the same thing on the top. Make it 0.5 inches positive, 0.5 inches negative. And I'll do the same thing on the sides. On the sides, you're going to have to tab over until you can just select that one single plane. But the point would be in doing this is that we have some kind of element or material that will render when you hit the render button. Because reference lines and individual lines don't necessarily render. Take a little break here just for a second, let you guys catch up. So down at the bottom here, I'm going to go ahead and make something a little more complicated than just a rectangle that we can extrude. So if you haven't gotten to this point, you might want to just draw this point that's down at the bottom and then follow along with these steps, and then you can always go back to working with your posts and your top rail and glass panel. So down here on this bottom rail, I'm going to make a C channel that we can extrude along with this, the path of wherever this guardrail system goes. And so on this plane, I want to basically draw a section of what a C-channel would look like, but I'm going to add a couple parameters to it so that we can make adjustments later. And the reason that I always add parameters to everything that we do in this environment is once you place this into your bridge project or in the conceptual mass environment, remember when I was looking at, when I actually placed this bridge component from last class, when I first placed it, it seemed a little out of scale. And because I applied parameters to this curtain wall panel piece, I went back, another day and went back into the curtain panel environment and just changed the parameters around so that it scaled down a little bit more and it wasn't so thick and heavy like how it ended up in the last class. So on this reference plane, I'm going to draw a line, and we need to pick that we're drawing it on this reference plane. And I'm going to snap to the center point. And I'm just going to draw a line something like type in 8 inches down. Then I'm going to draw another line from the center point and draw it up. And I'll draw that like 2 inches up. Or I guess kind of up to the right. Then I'm going to draw a line from the end points of each of these. And I'm going to draw it towards the top or up and type in 3 inches. I'm going to hit escape so I can move on to the next side. I'll type in 3 inches. So you should have kind of the outline of a C channel shown there. And then I'm going to hit the offset. So because I've been drawing on this 2D plane, and all of these lines are actually 2 dimensions on that plane, I can use the modify offset command. And I'm going to offset, let's do 0.375, which is 3/8 of an inch. Make sure copy is selected. And then I'm going to offset towards the inner and top of each of these. And then I need to do my trim and extend, because we have to make sure that we have a closed shape. And then at the top here, I'm going to close off the C channel. You have to make sure you're snapping each time, and if it's properly closed at the end, you should be able to just highlight or hover over this component and the whole entire profile shows up, or it gets selected. So to make sure that I can control this parametrically, I'm going to add a few more parameters so that I could adjust later on. First one will be called, let's do C or channel offset. Channel depth. And a channel height. I can exit out of that or hit OK. And so using the dimensions again, or align dimensions, I'm going to strike a dimension from, you look up on the screen at that reference plane that's associated with the point. I'm going to make sure that I'm snapping to the vertical line of that reference plane, and then I'm going to the outside edge. So I should have a 2-inch dimension going towards the glass panel. And then I'm going to do a overall from the outside edge to the outside edge of the C channel. And then from the horizontal reference plane of this point, you notice I'm hovering over that horizontal portion of that, and then I'm going to snap to the top leg. You have to find a good spot on the screen to sort of pull it off to. And I'm going to do The same thing on the other side. So basically just dimensioning, how you would probably dimension this C channel for somebody on construction documents anyway. But these are now going to be set to the different parameters. So the two that say 3 inches, I'm control and selected each one of them. I'm going to set that to be the channel depth. The one that's set to 2 inches will be the channel offset. And then the overall one that should be something like 10 inches, that'll be the channel height. Now before we can make that change parametrically, another thing that we need to do is, because we created an offset, is I'm going to dimension basically from outside to inside of each of the legs of this profile. And I'm going to change the scale because it's getting even more cluttered. But I should have a 3/8 inch dimension 3 times. That all I'm going to do is select that dimension string and find the padlock that should be floating either towards the top or bottom of the screen and lock it. Or if you're on horizontal, the padlock might be towards the top right. And I'm just selecting each of the dimension strings and finding its padlock and locking it. That should make it so that if I change any of those channel dimensions, let me just test it out, my profile, as you can see on the screen, should constantly change and everything should move with it. So I'm going to make my final channel depth 4 inches. I'll make the height, we can still make it 10 inches. And then the offset, I still want it to be 2 inches so I can move it. So all I was doing there is testing to make sure that all of my locks and parameters work correctly. And then the last step is to do the same thing that we've done with all the other extrusions. And that would be to tab over that bottom reference plane, control, select that C channel, and then create solid form. I'm going to do a save. And by having all those parameters there, later on you can always go back and just quickly adjust the different shapes and sizes of all the different rail pieces if you decide you want to trim things down as you apply it to a surface. So if you just do a save, you want to make sure you've saved it as a name. So I've got mine shown as glass panel railing. And I'm going to click on View and User Interface Recent Files. And let's just, since you guys don't have really a bridge yet to work with, just click on New Conceptual Mass. And I'm just going to create a bridge path real quick. I'm not going to do the extruded version. I'm just going to create a spline through a couple points. And if I close, make sure I'm snapping to the endpoints, kind of close this shape. Should be able to select all of these and say create solid form, and then extrude it. So I just quickly made a path, it's not controlled parametrically or anything like we did in the last class. It doesn't really matter the thickness. I made mine something like 6 inches thick, so it's really this really thin slab here. So when you have your path actually created, and this is just a solid form, basically you can build on top of this. So now that you've created kind of your thickness of your bridge slab, if you hover over, and it's hard to see up there on the screen, but I'm hovering over the top edge, and you should get a thing that says Form Element Edge as the tooltip that pops up. I'm going to click on that, and when I click on that, I'm clicking on the edge of this mass. I can create another solid form, and it should just extrude up that line, and so you have like this single plane. Now that plane is going to be associated with this mass, so if I were to edit this mass somehow, let me turn on the X-ray. You guys don't have to do this, but I'm just going to, so I move that, and I guess it created another line there. Well, railings would probably be something you would do last. But anyway, you can extrude that up, and maybe if this form was parametric, I could test that out a little bit later here. But basically this extrusion that goes up, I want to extrude it as a positive offset and change that dimension to 3 foot 6 inches. That's the height of a guardrail. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I can pick that top line and then say create solid form. My positive offset is 3 foot 6 inches. And so we've got our basically a mass that is going to be associated with this guardrail. Next thing would be to take each of these, and I'm going to do this together, so I controlled and selected both of them. We can divide the surface. Once we divide the surface, if you look at your properties, by default it always divides the surface to have 12 equal parts. That's a V grid and a U grid. I want my U grid, let me play with this number real quick, type in 6. So that is the up and down. I just want that to be 1. And then my V grid, I'm going to change that, instead of being a fixed number, I'm going to change that to be a fixed distance, and then type in 5 feet. So I want kind of a railing to occur every 5 feet. Then we can flip back into where our curtain panel family is and just load that into the project and make sure we're loading it into my conceptual mass at the moment, because I haven't done a save as. It's called family 2. And then we can take that divided surface and apply our glass panel railing to it. It might take a minute for it to think. I can do that to the other side. And now the last part is, once I've placed this, it looks like my C channel, when I kind of look at the end, my C channel's backwards to me. I want the C channel to actually flip to the other side. So once you've placed a component, if you click on that component and scroll down, you can see you have these options down here to flip the component. And if you just check that box and activate it, it'll take a minute, but it should flip that component to go in the other direction. So you can see that now flipped, and I can do that on the other side as well. And so that's another method for, I do a save as. That's another method for creating railings, especially if we're kind of working with the conceptual design environment and we've learned a little bit about the curtain panel pattern-based family. You can start to see that you can apply that pattern to anything. You could actually take this railing pattern. And if you wanted to find a complex surface and also apply it to that, if you wanted it to be some sort of canopy structure. But doing anything within the curtain panel family and understanding that if you just make sure that you host all of your points and your reference planes and your reference lines, and as long as you're working within those different constraints and parameters, no matter what you make in here, you can apply to any surface that you just divide up into certain divisions. So I'm going to save all that and close out of everything. And I want to introduce one more thing here while we've got like 5 minutes. It should only take 5 minutes. Introduce the adaptive component. And first thing I want to do is in the new conceptual mass under families, we want to start a new one. I'm going to create 3 splines. I don't really care what their shape is. I'm going to create one on the left, one on the right, and maybe one somewhere in the middle. The one that's in the middle, I'm going to move up so that I have something that looks like this. You can always take any of these points. You can adjust the shape a little bit more. So this next part will be basically drawing adaptive components is similar to curtain panel pattern-based families. Curtain panel pattern-based families are adaptive in their own sense in that they're adaptive to those endpoints that were associated with that particular template that you work with. Adaptive components are something that are more customizable to whatever you want to do. And basically they can extrude along a rail path. And what I've set up here is 3 rails. And because I have 3 rails, my adaptive component is going to start off with 3 adaptive points. If I had 5 rails or 6 rails, I would have 5 or 6 adaptive points in that family. So let's go ahead and click under View, User Interface, Recent Files, and I'm going to start a new family. And if I scroll down, there's a family template here that's called Generic Model Adaptive. This is the adaptive environment that's associated with the conceptual design environment that we can work with. Remember I said the Autodesk Revit conceptual design environment is made up of the conceptual mass, the current panel pattern-based family, and then also the generic model adaptive. So I'm going to open that up. It doesn't really matter where you're drawing on here because it's adaptive. It's always going to move and contort to whatever the rail configuration is. But you can see I've got the point element, and I'm going to draw 3 points. And I'm going to make them kind of like a triangle here. But I can then go back and select each of these points, and you should have this option over here to the top right that says Make Adaptive. When I click on Make Adaptive, these are now adaptive points similar to the curtain panel pattern-based family. You can see that they're numbered 1 through 3. And they're going to be numbered in the order that you place them. If you decide that you need to change the order, you can always select the number and you could type in a different number and it would reorder all the points. But the next part is I'm just going to make a line. And I'm going to turn on 3D snapping, and I'm going to make sure that I'm snapping to the adaptive points. I just made a triangle. And I made this as a model line. I'm actually gonna change it to be a reference line. So since I already drew that, you can select the line, and over here to the left, it says is reference line, and it's unchecked. I can just go ahead and check that, and that'll make it a green reference line. Last two steps here on this adaptive component is I'm going to make another point, host it on one of the reference planes. I'm going to turn on always as so I get a plane that I can draw on. Now I'm just going to draw a circle. We'll make a little pipe. So circle, I'm going to pick this plane. I have to select circle again, and then make sure I snap to that center point. And I'm not going to set up a parameter for this, but I'm going to change the dimension to be like, let's do 2 inches. That seems kind of small. Maybe 4 inches. And then I can select that particular circle, and then select all the triangular portions of the reference lines that we just drew, and hit create form and solid. So I basically have a solid pipe triangle. Before we move on, we need to give it a name. So I'll give this a family name, call this adaptive. I'm doing a save as adaptive. I'll just call it adaptive triangle. And now we can load this into our project, and you can see it's trying to place it. I'll let you guys get to this part. But I'm not going to place it right now. It wants me to place it somewhere. I'm just going to hit escape or hit the modify button. And I'm going to type in VG on the keyboard. And under annotation categories, I'm going to turn off under reference points. I'm going to uncheck the points under reference points and hit OK. Basically what that does is it turns off all those reference points that made up the spline. The reason I did that is because I want to actually snap my adaptive component to the endpoints of these rails. So an adaptive component can be placed by clicking on home, and it's a component, it's a family element, just like doors and windows and everything else that we've gone over. You click on component, and you should be able to select from the down arrow here under properties, your adaptive triangle. And now your adaptive triangle gets placed in the same order that your points were made. So if you remember, we did a triangle that had a point on the lower left, and then went to point number 2 was at the top, and then a point to the lower right was number 3. I'm going to look at that as my splines, and I'm going to snap to the one on the lower left, then move to the one on the top, and then the one on the lower right. That adaptive component is now hosted to those lines. If I select that adaptive component and hold in the control key, and then just drag with your left mouse button, hold it in, you can see I can copy more of these along this spline. And because they're hosted to that spline and those points are adaptive, they continue to adapt and contort to whatever happens with those splines. Now what's important about that is if you made this particular shape and you've got all this structure here, and you later decide, now I have to turn on my points again, if you later decide to change the form of your spline, so if I select one of those points that create that spline, and I'm going to move it in, as I make changes, my adaptive component is also making changes as well and adapting to however that adaptive component has ended up. So this would be something that I would use to create some kind of structural system, that would hold up your bridge path. You could also use a curtain panel pattern-based family to create your structural system and just create more solid surfaces that you can divide up. That's all we kind of have for today. I'm going to do a save as here. And Tuesday is our last class. I know some of you have thesis, but we're still going to have to do the lecture and the lab because you guys need a conclusion to figure out how you're actually going to complete your final project. Let me save this real quick. So the lecture on Tuesday is going to be composed of how we would take a bridge that we've made with the conceptual mass environment, the curtain panel pattern-based families, this adaptive components. I'll kind of have an example of one created, how you would place that into your SOA model. And then we're going to go over some interior rendering techniques. And then in the lab, we'll probably go over how to set up a 11 by 17 piece of paper and then how to drag and drop your drawings onto it and what might be expected for construction documents. We're not going to do, I'll go over kind of the requirements of what I would think you would show on your 11 by 17 pieces of paper. That's all.